Well, it's been about 3 months since the last video, so must be time for another one. To be fair, there's not a lot been happening here. We've been going through the winter, and most of the time we've been in a COVID lockdown. So at the moment we can only go 5 kilometers from the apartment, so that's restrictive to say the least. And obviously with it being winter, the weather's not been that great either, so I haven't really had too much enthusiasm for making some videos, and there hasn't really been a lot of material, so don't get too excited. But this one is going to focus on 2 really fascinating subjects: how to make sourdough bread and how I've dialed in the Espresso coffee machine that we've got to try and make the perfect cup of coffee. So for those of you that haven't already said, that's enough for me, I'm switching off. Those of you that are still here, well done, congratulations, good staying power. So the sourdough bread, yeah. So normally get the bread from the Prahran market, which is just beyond the 5 kilometer zone for us to travel to. So we haven't been able to get there for 6 weeks now, and it's the only place in Melbourne that I've actually been able to find decent bread. So I've been trying it from supermarkets and bakeries, and it's just not very good. So took the plunge the other day, bought a bread machine, and have been scouring the recipe books, and a couple of days ago Mace had a first attempt at some sourdough bread, and surprisingly it was pretty good. The only issue was it just didn't rise enough, so it was a bit sort of solid and dense. So I'm in the process of making the second batch now, and hopefully this one will be a bit more successful. I'm going to let the bread prove during the day when it's a bit warmer, so hopefully we get a little bit more elevation from the proving process. So let's just have a look at the process to make some sourdough bread. So what differentiates sourdough bread from most other breads is there's no yeast used to actually prove the bread mix and make it rise and ferment. What you use instead is a sourdough starter, which is what's in this jar. So it's pretty simple. It's just a mix of flour and water, and it then effectively uses the natural yeasts that are in the air to start fermenting itself, and effectively what you do is grow it. So for example, this mix here, you can see the marker there where my finger is. What I would do is I would add some flour and water in equal quantities to basically double this quantity, and then I would just let it ferment and grow. So this starter in here would basically feed itself on the flour that I fed it, and what you're going to do is you're going to get it sort of popping up to about this point in the jar. So it's really going to sort of grow and bubble up and look nice and active and healthy. And at that point, it's then ready to be mixed with more flour and water and salt to make the bread itself. So this is what we've done here. So in the bread maker, I've taken some of the starter, mixed it with about 500-600 grams of flour, some water and some salt, and it's just gone through the dough recipe on the bread maker to mix it up, and it's sort of sat there for about an hour now, and it's looking nice and plump. And I'm just going to put it somewhere a little bit warmer, and hopefully over the next 3 or 4 hours it will continue to ferment and grow, hopefully probably to about this point, The first one I made really only sort of popped up to about here. I'm hoping this one, because it's a bit warmer today, might sort of get up to about here. And then it's ready at that point to be molded into the bread shape you want. We'll put it, just leave it in that state overnight, and then I'll bake it tomorrow morning. So quite a long drawn out process, probably about 36 hours from the point at which I fed this starter to get it going, then the mixing, then letting it prove and ferment and grow, resting it overnight, and then baking it in the morning. So you need to sort of think a bit ahead in terms of when do you need your bread. But all being well, later on today we will see that it has grown in volume. Okay, so I've pulled it out of the pan from the bread machine, and I'm just going to basically stretch and fold it a few times, which I'm told helps the gluten to form inside the bread mix. No idea why that's the case, but I'll follow the recipe. And this helps also to get some of the nice bubbles in the flour, so that when you eventually bake the bread, you've got some nice sort of air bubbles in it, which makes it a really light bread, which is what I didn't really have with the first one. So, and I didn't do this too much on the first one, so I'm going to do this 2 or 3 times over the next few hours and just see how it goes. Anybody that really knows what they're doing in terms of making sourdough bread is probably wincing and shouting at this video now, so I apologize. But anyway, let's just leave it like this, picture in our mind what it looks like now, and come back in a few hours time and see whether all this loving care and attention has had some benefits. Okay, so this has been going about 3 hours now, I guess, since the last video. I've pulled and stretched it once in that time, and it'll be interesting to look back on the video, because to my eye that has definitely expanded. So I am just going to put it in a bowl now and cover it with cling film to stop the air getting to it, and then basically just leave it overnight, ready for baking in the morning. Okay, so time to hopefully bake the bread. So as you can see, it has risen significantly. In fact, I had to put this in the fridge last night just to calm it down, because it was just going ballistic. So I'm hoping it hasn't overproved. A good sign is that the cling film is coming away without sticking. That is a good sign, apparently. So I am going to get this out of the bowl. Again, hopefully it hasn't stuck. So I'm going to get it out of the bowl, and because there's so much, I think what I can do is I can make a baguette style loaf, and then a big full like tin sized loaf. So I'm just going to split some off now to make the baguette. I'll bake that first. Let's see what happens. Maybe I'll just try and tip it and see what happens. Okay, so yeah, it's come out pretty well. I'm not sure how much it's still going to rise when it's baking. I'm hoping It's still got some life back in it. That's better. Don't want it too pointy at the end, otherwise it tends to sort of toast, because you have to bake this at a high temperature. Okay, I think that will do. Final thing, score, which apart from making the finished product look really good, enables it to rise in the oven without splitting. Right, the oven has got up to temperature 220, 230 degrees centigrade, and I did say that when I was putting the bread mix into the pan that I was thinking it may rise a little bit before I put it in the oven. Well, it's done more than that. It's actually produced a little baby baguette as well. So that's pretty impressive, isn't it? I think we've just witnessed a miracle. Well, of course, reality is Vassie prefers baguette to the loaf, the traditional loaf. So she said, can you just put another little baguette in there as well? So I have done that, but you can, I'm sure, see that it has risen. So those scores that I made in the bread have opened out already. So we're going to put it in the oven. You'll see on the bottom of the oven, hopefully, I've got a pan with some water. So what we need to do is produce steam inside the oven, and that will help the texture of the outside of the baguette to get really crispy. So let's leave that for 20 minutes. Hey Siri, set timer for 20 minutes.
Okay, your timer is set for 20 minutes.
So while we wait 20 minutes for the magic to happen in the oven, we are gonna have the first coffee of the day. And I'm going to take you through how I have dialed in this Breville coffee machine to produce, hopefully, the perfect flat white for the morning. One consequence of being in lockdown over just about the whole of the winter is I've had lots of spare time. So I've been watching a great number of YouTube videos on how to make espresso coffee, and in particular how to use this particular Breville machine and how to dial it in. That's the expression they use, dialing it in. So in terms of dialing it in, what you're trying to do there is you're trying to get the type of coffee taste that you like. And I like a pretty strong coffee. The problem is, if you're not careful, a strong coffee can turn into a bitter coffee. So it's trying to find that balance where you've got a good strong coffee, but it's not bitter. And there's a number of ways that you have to do this. So we'll work through these as we make this coffee. The first thing is the type of beans you're using. And I've tried a variety of beans, but I've finished up on this particular blend now for a few weeks. Seems to be working well. It's a 100% Peruvian Arabica bean, and I then have to grind them. And how you grind them has a big impact in terms of how the coffee tastes. So because I like a strong coffee, I want a really fine grind. A fine grind means it's quite compressed, and that means it takes quite a long time for the water to go through the coffee in the basket here, which means it's in contact with the coffee beans for as long as possible to extract as much flavour as it can without it being too long, because that's when it gets bitter. So I've played around with the actual grinder, which is underneath this hopper, And I've made that operate a little bit finer than the standard grind. And then down the side here, we've got another dial which also impacts on how fine the coffee is ground. That's a 10 scale adjuster, and I've got it sitting, I found 5 seems to work quite well for me. So they're the two ways that I actually adjust the fineness of the grind. Okay, the next thing I've learned in terms of making a good quality coffee is make sure that the machine is well warmed up. So this has been on for about 20 minutes now, warming up, and I can feel the heat coming through from the basket that the coffee is going to sit in into the handle here. So that's telling me that this is nice and warm, which means that the coffee, when it's been ground and it's gone into that basket, it's all going to be nice and happy and comfortable and cozy and warm, which means it's going to be in a good frame of mind to make a lovely tasting coffee. So it's important that you make sure everything's warmed up and ready to go. So what we're going to do now is something that I don't do every time, but because I'm filming, we'll just do this today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to weigh how much ground coffee I get into the basket. So, okay, so we'll zero that. Okay, that's nicely zeroed. Back into the holder. And now we're going to grind the coffee. So we've ground the coffee. Now what we need to do is just tap it a bit. And the idea behind this is to just get rid of any air pockets that we might have got in that basket of ground coffee. Water follows the path of least resistance, so if there are any air pockets, it's going to channel through that area, the water. And that means it's going to go through a lot quicker than it ought to, meaning it's not in contact with the coffee beans for as long as it needs to extract the right amount of taste. So tapping it like that gets rid of the air bubbles, and then we need to get it leveled out, and we use this little appliance, which, as you can probably see, has got some patterning on it. It's quite heavy. We just pop that into there, we spin it round, and now we have got a nice even surface. It's already tamped down a little because of the weight of that appliance, but to make sure we get the right resistance to the water, we're just going to tamp it down a little bit more. And now, ordinarily, we'd be ready to go. But on this occasion, I'm going to weigh. And what you can see is we've got 20 grams of ground coffee in that basket, which is about what I'd be hoping for ordinarily. So the reason we do that is we want to, when we finish extracting the coffee, so we've passed the water through the coffee and it's in the cup, the mug, we want double the weight of the ground coffee. So we've got 20 grams of ground coffee, so we want 40 grams of espresso in the cup. That's what we're aiming for. So we're just going to make sure that the coffee machine's nice and clean. We're going to put this in, and we're almost ready to go. So I've got a coffee mug that I've had some hot water in, just warming it up. So just like we want the machine to be nice and warm, we want the cup nice and warm as well. And we're going to zero that. The final thing we're going to do is we're going to time how long it takes to extract the coffee. And again, these videos are telling me that 20 to 30 seconds is the ideal time to extract. If you take too long, so maybe 40 seconds, then the water is taking too long to come through the coffee, and it's going to get that bitter taste. If you don't take long enough, so under the 20 seconds, it's passing through, it's not in contact with the coffee beans long enough to properly extract the taste to get that nice strong flavour that I'm looking for. So we ideally want it about 20 to 30 seconds. I try and go for a very high pressure on this gauge. That's what generally gives me the extraction time that I need, and that's all been determined by how finely ground the coffee is and how hard I've tamped it down. So let's get this stopwatch ready to go. This is all programmed, so it's programmed and it should extract about 40 grams of coffee. So the coffee started coming out at about 8 seconds. You can see the pressure's up towards the top end of the range. 25 grams in there now. And we've stopped it at about 24 seconds. And it's just dribbling the final bits of coffee in there. And look at that. Exactly 40 grams of coffee. That is perfecto. So now we're going to steam the milk, and what we're aiming for with the milk is to try get the right sort of consistency as well as the right temperature. So we want something around about 65 to 70 degrees. So I've got a little thermometer here just to test where we do get to. I sort of do it by feel. So let's see whether or not I get the feel right this time round. So what we're going to do is just clear out some of the moisture water within the steam wand before we start steaming. And then we'll work on this milk, which is about 150 mils. So initially, what we're going to do is we're going to have the wand on the surface, so it's creating bubbles. And what we're then going to do once we've got what we think is the right quantity of bubbles, we're just going to lower the wand in slightly, and that's going to pull all those bubbles down into the milk and distribute them around the milk. And hopefully what you can see is we've got a nice swirl going on with the milk. And I'm holding it underneath and I can tell it's starting to get pretty warm now. So I'm just going to ease off the angle a little bit, get it really swirling. We'll put that to one side while we clean the wand. Drop the thermometer in, check the temperature. So you won't be able to see the needle, which is good because the needle's red. The reason you can't see it is because it's smack bang in the middle of that red marked area, which is the ideal temperature, about 65 to 70 centigrade. So that's a good sign. Got the milk temperature right. Have to say it's not the best milk I've ever made in terms of consistency. It's got too many big bubbles in. I was focusing so much on the filming that I lost the plot a bit in terms of the bubbling. It's just got a swirl it around and absorb some of those bigger bubbles. And then one thing I haven't perfected yet is the art of producing some nice patterns on top of the milk. So what we'll do is we'll start off by pouring in from some height, twirling it around just to create the palette for the artwork. And then we tip the coffee and start pouring. And as you can see, the milk's just basically diving down into the coffee without creating a pattern. And this is what I've got to work on. Eventually I do get some sort of foam on there, but it's too late, too little. So we'll do another one here and another one here. And then you can decide what that looks like. Looks like a dog's breakfast to me, but hopefully it's not impacting the taste. So I'd said that I've got too many bubbles. The foam was just too foamy, and that's why it's been quite difficult to get any sort of pattern onto the milk. Okay, the finished product. Lovely. Must be time to get the bread out of the oven now. And there we have it. That looks pretty good, I have to say. So we'll let that cool down and we'll sort out to get the bigger loaf in, and we'll do that very shortly. Okay, so time to take the water out after 20 minutes of the big loaf being in the oven. Okay, 10 minutes more after the water has been removed. We've just let it finish off without the steam. And let's just see what... Ah, yeah. I hope I'm getting this. Okay, yeah, that looks lovely. So I think it's definitely risen a bit more than the first loaf I made. So nice little collection of bread there for a Sunday morning. Ready for some bread.
That looks nice.
Yeah. Crunchy, crunchy. Yeah. Oh yeah, some nice little bubbles in there. So we've got some goat's milk, French goat's milk Gouda here, which is a hard cheese, and a creamy French goat's milk. Actually, this isn't French. This is from Victoria here in Australia. It's getting a little on the mature side because the creamy bit in the middle is starting to diminish, but I'm sure it's still lovely. And some feta. This is Bulgarian feta. Bulgarian goat feta with some tomatoes and capers, and of course the bread. So there we go, nice Sunday brunch with some Spanish olive oil. And the verdict is okay.
Very crunchy.
Yeah, very crunchy.
Nice.
Taste? How does it compare to the one we've been buying from the market?
As good as, I would say.
Wow. Well, must be time for me to start eating. Bye for now.